want to explore this creepy abandoned school at night and see if I can handle whatever spooky surprises it is in store for me. This abandoned school I'm standing in front of has quite the reputation in this small town. In rural America, locals whisper about the eerie atmosphere that surrounds it and how it's been abandoned for decades. The building itself looks like it's been frozen in time, with cracked windows and faded paint that hints at the stories it could tell all sorts of rumors and reports of hauntings and strange occurrences linked to this school. From unexplained noises and movements to full-blown apparitions, people claim to have experienced some truly terrifying stuff. One local even told me about a mysterious figure in a janitor's uniform that's said to roam the empty halls at night. I'm not saying I believe it, but it's definitely got my attention. Some say that the strange happening started after a tragedy struck the school back in the 70s. Others claim it's been haunted since the very beginning, when it was first built on an ancient Native American burial ground. Whatever the reason, one thing's for sure, this place is creepy. I'm not just talking about the crumbling facade or the broken playground equipment. From what I've gathered, people have reported all sorts of paranormal activity, from doors slamming shut on their own to disembodied voices whispering in the darkness. It's enough to make your skin crawl, and I'm not even inside yet. I have to wonder, is it all just mass hysteria, or is there really something sinister lurking in the shadows? As I delve deeper into the history of this abandoned school, I'm struck by the stories from former students and faculty. Their tales of harsh discipline, of teachers who ruled with an iron fist, and of students who struggled to make ends meet. It's clear that this school was a place of hardship, and maybe even trauma. But what led to its abandonment, and why did it fall into such disrepair? From what I've learned, the school was closed down due to budget cuts and declining enrollment. But the real tragedy is what happened to the students and teachers who once called this place home. Many of them were forced to relocate, leaving behind not just a building, but a community. It's a shame because this school was more than just for walls. It was a hub of activity, of learning, of growth. As I explore the school, I'm struck by the remnants of a bygone era. Old textbooks, broken desks, and faded chalkboards all tell a story of neglect and decay. But it's what I found in the basement that really sent chills down my spine. A series of cryptic messages scrawled on the walls, warning of an entity that lurks in the shadows. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but this school is definitely giving me the creeps. One story in particular has really stuck with me, the tale of a young student who died here back in the 50s. They say her spirit still roams the halls, searching for something or someone. I don't know what to make of it, but it's definitely got me wondering if this school is more than just a little haunted. So, to recap, we've got an abandoned school with a rich history of hauntings and strange occurrences. We've got rumors of paranormal activity, from apparitions to unexplained noises. We've got a whole lot of questions about what really went down here. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing's for sure, this school is creepy. It's got a whole lot of stories to tell. If you've got a ghost story of your own, be sure to share it in the comments below. And if you're looking for more spine-chilling content, be sure to check out my other video on haunted locations. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Part 1, The Approach. The air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves, and the chill of the autumn night had already sunk deep into my bones. I stood at the gate, staring at the old, decrepit school that loomed before me like some forgotten relic from a darker time. Even with the moon casting a pale glow over the broken playground, the place felt suffocated, like it didn't want to be seen, like it didn't want anyone here. The locals in town had warned me, of course. They always do. Every small town has its secrets, and this was theirs, a rotting husk of a building that, even after decades of abandonment, still cast a shadow over their lives. They'd told me about the rumors, the tragedies, and the whispers that seemed to linger around it like an invisible fog. Some said the school was built on cursed land, others spoke of a janitor who never left, even after death. They'd tell me these things and then shudder, as if just speaking about the place brought it closer. But tonight, curiosity was stronger than fear. I glanced up at the cracked windows. Most were shattered, their jagged edges resembling the sharp teeth of some great beast, watching and waiting. The front doors, large and heavy, were chained shut, just like the locals had said. It was meant to keep people out, but I had a feeling it wasn't people they were trying to keep away. A sudden gust of wind rattled the doors, making the chains scrape against the rusting metal. I stepped back instinctively, feeling that familiar sensation of being watched. But there was no one here. There couldn't be. Taking a deep breath, I walked around the side of the building, my flashlight cutting through the dark like a knife. The side door was my way in. The locals had whispered about it in hushed tones, the one that never stayed locked no matter how many times it had been secured. And there it was, ajar, creaking gently in the wind like an uninvited guest. I hesitated. A story stuck with me, a girl in the 50s who never left. They said she still roamed the halls, searching, waiting for something. Or maybe it was someone. I wasn't sure why I thought of that now, but something about her story had always felt wrong. Like it was missing a piece, a detail that no one was willing to share. I pushed the door open with a creak that echoed through the empty hallways, and suddenly the world felt much smaller, as if the weight of the past was bearing down on me. The smell hit me first, damp and musty, like the air hadn't moved in years. My footsteps echoed in the dark. There was something eerie about the silence, a heaviness that pressed down on me with every step I took. The stories I'd heard earlier swirled in my mind, about the ghost of the janitor, the tragedy in the 70s, and the way things began to unravel here long before that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, even though I hadn't seen anyone yet. The flashlight beam flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the hallway. Every door I passed was closed tight, but behind one, I heard it, a faint whisper. It was almost too quiet to catch, like the wind sneaking through the cracks, but it was there. My heart pounded as I stopped dead in my tracks, my ears straining to catch the sound again. Nothing. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then the whisper came again, closer this time. Clearer. My hand trembled as I gripped the flashlight tighter, aiming it down the hallway. The beam caught something at the far end, movement. I blinked, and it was gone. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. It was just nerves. It had to be. But as I stood there, in that moment of eerie silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Slowly, I began to walk again, my footsteps cautious, quiet. The whispers, they were growing more insistent, like a chorus of voices just beyond my reach. And then, as I rounded a corner, I froze. A figure stood at the end of the hall. Tall. Thin. In a janitor's uniform, his back turned toward me. The whispers stopped. Suddenly, the figure began to move, slowly dragging its feet down the hallway, its shoes scraping against the tiled floor. Something was wrong. Its movements were unnatural, like each step was an effort. The air around it seemed to thicken, the shadows growing darker, pulling toward it. I swallowed hard, my heart thudding in my chest as I backed away, the flashlight flickering violently in my shaking hands. The figure was closer now, still dragging itself toward me, slow but relentless. And then, the whisper came again, not from the hallway this time, but right behind me. Get out. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just darkness. But something was there. I could feel it, a presence, breathing down my neck. Part 2, The Descent. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it would burst from my chest. That whisper, those two words, still echoed in my mind as I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Get out. The voice had been so close, so real, like whoever, or whatever, it belonged to was standing right behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the dark, yawning emptiness of the hallway stretching behind me. And yet, I wasn't alone. I knew I wasn't. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm my shaking hands, but the beam of the flashlight continued to tremble, making the shadows dance wildly across the walls. I was torn between turning back and continuing deeper into the school, but something compelled me forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stupidity. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see what was inside. The figure in the janitor's uniform was gone, vanished as if it had never been there at all. My feet felt heavy as I took another step, the sound of my shoes scraping against the old floor sending a jolt through me. The building seemed to breathe with me, the air thick and humid, and each breath felt like it was pulling me further into its grasp. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. I had entered through the side door, which meant I was near the east wing, where most of the classrooms were. According to the stories, that wing was notorious for strange occurrences. Teachers used to complain about objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut when no one was there, and the feeling that something unseen was watching. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, like I was wading through some invisible swamp. Suddenly, I heard a faint thud. I whipped the flashlight toward the source of the noise, my breath catching in my throat. The beam settled on one of the classroom doors at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, swinging gently as if someone, or something, had just gone inside. For a moment, I stood rooted to the spot, my instincts screaming at me to turn and leave. But then, without thinking, I began to move toward the door. The closer I got, the more I could hear it, a soft rustling sound, like pages of a book being flipped through. My mind flashed back to the stories, the rumors of objects moving on their own. My mouth went dry, and I swallowed hard as I reached the door. The door creaked as I nudged it open with my foot, revealing a dimly lit classroom bathed in the weak moonlight filtering through the cracked windows. I stepped inside cautiously. Desks were scattered haphazardly across the room, some overturned, others piled into corners as if in a desperate attempt to block something out. The blackboard at the front was covered in strange, jagged lines of chalk, like someone had scribbled wildly without any purpose. But what caught my attention the most was the pile of papers in the middle of the room, scattered across the floor like some invisible hand had flung them there. They were yellowed with age, covered in old, faded ink, but as I knelt down to examine them, one word stood out. Run. It was scrawled across the top sheet in jagged, angry letters. Underneath, more pages contained frantic messages, written in a hurried, desperate hand, it watches from the walls. It won't let us leave. It knows. Don't stay after dark, My blood ran cold as I read the words, my pulse thundering in my ears. I shuffled through the papers, finding more of the same, pleas for help, warnings to get out, to escape. And then, on the last page, one final message that chilled me to the bone. We tried to close the door, but it keeps opening. It wants us here. It wants us dead, A soft whisper brushed against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. I spun around, expecting to find someone standing behind me, but the room was empty. And then, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, the closet door at the far end of the room. It was slightly open, the same way the entrance door had been. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to approach it, but my feet betrayed me, dragging me toward it as if some unseen force was pulling me closer. The door creaked open further as I neared, revealing only darkness beyond. My hand hovered over the knob, hesitant, shaking, but I had to know. I had to see what was inside. With a deep breath, I pulled the door open wide. The darkness inside was thick, impenetrable by the weak beam of my flashlight. I leaned in, straining to see something, anything, but there was nothing. And yet, the air in the closet felt different, colder, like a void that sucked the warmth from the room. As I stepped closer, a foul stench hit me, a smell so rancid it made my stomach lurch. Something moved inside. A rustling sound, like fabric brushing against the floor, followed by a low, wet scraping noise that sent my heart into overdrive. I backed away, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled to keep the flashlight steady. Then, out of the darkness, a hand reached out. Not a human hand. Its skin was gray and leathery, stretched tight over jagged bones. The fingers were long, far too long, and the nails were sharp, curved like claws. My breath hitched as I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body was frozen, paralyzed with terror. The hand twitched, then began to drag itself out of the darkness, followed by an arm, twisted and unnatural. And then, the whisper returned, louder this time, insistent. Run. I didn't need to be told again. I turned and bolted, sprinting down the hallway, the sound of scraping and dragging following me. Whatever it was coming, fast. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the darkness thickening around me like a living thing, choking the air from my lungs. I could feel it behind me, closing in, its presence cold and suffocating. I reached the staircase at the end of the hall, throwing myself down the steps, barely managing to stay on my feet as I stumbled into the basement. The sound of dragging followed me, relentless, echoing off the walls. There was no time to think, no time to plan. I ran deeper into the darkness, hoping, praying for a way out. But the basement wasn't empty. And as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I realized that whatever was chasing me wasn't the only thing down there. Something else was waiting. And it was watching. Part 3, What Waits Below. The basement was worse than I'd imagined. The moment I hit the bottom of the stairs, the air changed, thicker, colder. The smell of damp and rot filled my lungs, making it hard to breathe. My heart was still hammering in my chest from whatever had crawled out of that closet, and I was already drenched in cold sweat. The faint scraping from the upper floor echoed down the stairwell, and I knew it was still coming. I didn't dare look back. The flashlight flickered as I swept it across the basement, revealing long-forgotten furniture covered in dust, cobwebs hanging from exposed pipes, and broken tiles scattered across the floor. The further the beam of light stretched, the more the darkness seemed to fight it, swallowing it up before it could reach the far corners of the room. I was trapped down here. For a moment, I thought I could hear breathing, low, deep, and steady. It wasn't mine. My breath came in quick, panicked gasps as I spun the light toward the far end of the basement. Nothing. Just an old boiler sitting silent and still in the corner, its rusted surface reflecting the weak glow of my flashlight. But I knew something was here. And then I saw it. In the far corner, just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam, something moved. A subtle shift, like a shadow peeling itself from the wall. I froze, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. The shape was too tall, too thin, impossibly thin, its body contorted in a way that made my skin crawl. Its limbs seemed too long, bending at unnatural angles, and its head. I couldn't even make out its face, if it had one. It was watching me. My legs trembled as I stepped back, my flashlight flickering wildly as if it could sense the unnatural presence in the room. The figure shifted again, this time coming closer, its movements deliberate, almost curious. The sound of its footsteps echoed off the concrete floor, slow and dragging, each one sending a wave of dread through me. Suddenly, the air seemed to grow colder, so cold I could see my breath misting in front of me. The scraping sound from upstairs grew louder, faster, as if whatever was chasing me was picking up speed. I glanced toward the staircase, my mind racing. If I stayed here, whatever that thing was in the corner would reach me first, but if I ran up the stairs, I'd run right into the thing from the closet. I was trapped. The figure took another step, its twisted body gliding across the floor without making a sound. The flashlight sputtered in my hand, its light dimming even further, and I felt the chill of panic creeping up my spine. "Why won't you leave?" The voice was sharp, almost a hiss, coming from somewhere behind me. I whipped around, but the basement was still empty, save for the shifting shadows. My head pounded, and a wave of nausea hit me as I realized I wasn't just hearing voices, I was feeling them. Each whisper seemed to press against my skin, crawling into my mind like tendrils of smoke. My voice cracked, barely a whisper itself. I didn't mean to. You shouldn't have come. The voice was closer now, the words slipping through the cracks of my mind. It wants you. The figure in the corner was closing the distance, its long arms stretching out toward me, fingers twitching as if eager to grasp something. The room seemed to hum with a low vibration, almost like the pulse of the building itself. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the stairwell, followed by a deep, guttural growl that echoed through the basement, and I knew that whatever had been following me had made it downstairs. The scraping sound was back, louder now, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of nails, *claws*, dragging across the stone floor. My body tensed as I felt the cold breath of something behind me, far too close. I was out of time. Desperation took over, and I bolted toward the nearest doorway, my flashlight swinging wildly in my hand as I stumbled through the dark. I didn't care where I was going anymore, anywhere was better than here. The door led me into a long, narrow hallway, and the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt the atmosphere shift again. The air was heavier here. Stale. It pressed down on me like a weight, making it hard to move, hard to think. My flashlight flickered again, and then, without warning, it went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it against my palm, but it refused to turn back on. The only sound now was the deafening beat of my own heart and the steady drip of water from somewhere above. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate step from behind me. Something was in the hallway with me. I backed up against the wall, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I strained to see in the pitch black. Another step. Closer this time. My fingers brushed against the cold stone behind me, and I realized I had nowhere to run. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. A breath of icy wind washed over me, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of rot. My stomach twisted as I felt something brush against my arm, cold, skeletal fingers trailing over my skin. I jerked away, slamming into the opposite wall as a deep, guttural voice growled from the darkness. "Leave, now." My legs buckled, and I collapsed to the floor, my mind racing for a way out. I could feel its presence looming over me, the weight of its gaze burning into my skin. The thing from the hallway, the thing that had crawled out of the closet, was standing just inches away. And then, I saw it. Just ahead, at the end of the hallway, a faint sliver of light. An open door. Hope flared in my chest, and I scrambled to my feet, forcing my body to move despite the crushing fear. I ran, my shoes slipping on the damp floor as I darted toward the light, my lungs burning with every breath. Behind me, the growling grew louder, more frantic, as if it knew I was getting away. I reached the door just as the light blinked out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I stumbled forward, crashing through the doorway, and the floor gave way beneath me. I fell, tumbling into the void, the cold air rushing past me as I plummeted into the unknown. When I hit the ground, the impact knocked the wind from my lungs, and I lay there, gasping for breath, disoriented and confused. My vision blurred, but as I forced myself to sit up, I realized I was no longer in the basement. This room, it was different. The walls were lined with old photographs, the faces of long-forgotten students staring blankly at me. Desks, identical to the ones in the classrooms upstairs, were arranged in neat rows, but these were covered in dust and cobwebs, as though they hadn't been touched in decades. And then I saw it, carved into the floor in deep, jagged lines. A symbol. One I recognized from the stories. It was the mark of something ancient. Something evil. And it was pulsing. Part 4, The Mark. The symbol on the floor was alive. It pulsed with a sickly, faint glow, the light creeping through the jagged lines like veins of blood. As I stared at it, transfixed, a deep, primal terror rooted itself in my chest. The symbol, no, the mark, felt wrong. It radiated a darkness that was impossible to describe, as if it was a hole in reality itself, pulling the very essence of the room into its depths. I dragged my eyes away, trying to force the rising panic back down, but the feeling clung to me like a weight. I could feel its pull, drawing me in, making my legs heavy as I struggled to stand. The air was thick, suffocating, and every breath felt like I was inhaling something toxic. My body ached from the fall, but the pain barely registered against the gnawing fear that clawed at my insides. I was trapped. There was no question about it now. The room was small, the walls lined with rows of dusty shelves, ancient textbooks, and forgotten school supplies that looked as if they'd been left behind in a hurry. The old photographs on the walls stared down at me, their faded eyes hollow and lifeless, watching as if waiting for me to make a mistake. Every inch of this place felt wrong, corrupted by something malevolent. Something that had been here long before the school had been built. I backed away from the glowing mark, trying to put distance between myself and whatever dark force it held. My foot brushed against something, and I turned to see a set of stairs leading up to a door. The door looked old, older than the rest of the building, with splintered wood and rusted hinges. It was slightly ajar, and from the crack, I could see a faint light spilling through. My heart skipped. An escape. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't waste time questioning it. I rushed toward the door, desperate to be anywhere but this cursed room. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the doorknob just as a sound stopped me dead in my tracks, a low, wet whisper coming from behind me. "Stay." I froze, the word crawling up my spine like ice. Slowly, I turned, my flashlight hanging limp at my side. The room seemed darker now, the light from the mark dimming as shadows crept along the walls. And then, I saw it. Something was moving in the far corner, a shape emerging from the darkness. It wasn't human. The thing that crawled out of the shadows was twisted, its body bent in ways that made my skin crawl. Its limbs were unnaturally long, dragging across the floor with each agonizing movement. The skin, if you could even call it that, was a sickly gray, stretched tight over bones that jutted out at odd angles. Its head was hunched, almost dragging along the floor as it crawled toward the center of the room. Toward the mark. My pulse spiked, and I took a step back, bumping into the door behind me. The thing paused, its head lifting slightly, and for the first time, I could see its face, or the lack of one. Where its eyes should have been, there were only empty hollows, deep and black, as if the creature's very being had been hollowed out. And yet, I could feel it watching me, its sightless gaze fixed on me like a predator stalking its prey. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling around the room in a dissonant chorus. They came from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, the floors. My head pounded, the voices growing louder and louder until they were screaming inside my skull. "Don't leave. Stay with us." The thing let out a wet, rasping breath, its body twitching violently as it moved closer to the mark. I watched, horrified, as it reached out with one of its grotesque, clawed hands and began to trace the lines of the symbol. The glowing intensified, brightening until the entire room was bathed in a sickly green light. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, trapped in place as the whispers grew to a fever pitch. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, and the mark pulsed in response, throbbing like a heartbeat. I had to get out. Now. With every ounce of strength I had left, I wrenched the door open and stumbled through, my feet barely keeping up with the momentum as I bolted up the stairs. Behind me, I heard the sound of something wet and heavy slamming against the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against wood. It was coming after me. I reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door shut behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was in a narrow hallway now, lit only by a flickering overhead light. The walls were lined with faded posters, old announcements, school events, forgotten memories of a time when this place had been alive. But now it was dead. Just like everything else in this building. The scraping behind the door grew louder, more frantic, as whatever was down there began to slam itself against the door. The wood groaned, cracking under the pressure. It wouldn't hold for long. I had to keep moving. I stumbled down the hallway, my legs weak and unsteady beneath me. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragmented horrors I had witnessed. The mark, the creature, the voices, it was all connected. The stories about this place, the rumors, the tragedy in the 70s, it wasn't just urban legend. There was something real here. Something ancient. Something evil. As I neared the end of the hallway, a door to my left caught my eye. It was slightly ajar, just like the others I had encountered before. I paused, hesitant, but something drew me toward it. A faint light flickered from inside, casting eerie shadows across the threshold. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a classroom, but unlike any I had seen before. The walls were covered in strange symbols, similar to the one I had seen in the basement, but different, more intricate. Desks were arranged in a circle, and in the center of the room stood an old, wooden chair. And sitting in the chair was a figure. A girl. Her back was to me, her long, dark hair hanging in matted tangles over her shoulders. She was wearing an old-fashioned school uniform, the kind you'd expect to see in a black-and-white photograph from decades ago. Her head was bowed, her hands resting limply in her lap. I knew who she was. The stories had spoken of her, the girl who had died here in the 50s. The one whose spirit was said to wander the halls, searching for something, or someone. My heart raced as I took a step closer, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" The girl didn't move. She sat there, perfectly still, as if she hadn't heard me at all. I took another step forward, the air in the room growing colder with every inch I closed between us. And then, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely audible, but the words cut through the silence like a knife. "You shouldn't have come." She turned slowly, and when I saw her face, my blood ran cold. Her eyes were gone, just empty, hollow sockets staring back at me, black as the void. But it wasn't her face that terrified me the most. It was the twisted smile that stretched across her lips, wide and unnatural, as if someone had carved it into her skin. "I told you," she whispered, her voice dripping with malice. "It wants you." Before I could react, the door behind me slammed shut. Part 5, the door that wouldn't close. The slam of the door jolted me back to reality, snapping the trance that had gripped me in the presence of the girl with the hollow eyes. My heart felt like it would explode out of my chest, the echoes of the door reverberating through the room. For a moment, everything was still, the eerie silence pressing down like a vice. The girl's smile widened, her lips cracking at the edges, as if the act of smiling was tearing her face apart. She didn't move, just sat there in the old wooden chair, her empty gaze boring into me. The cold in the room intensified, biting at my skin, and I could feel something else, a presence, lurking just beyond sight, waiting. "Don't try to run," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "It's already here." Panic surged through me. I spun toward the door, gripping the handle, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard I pulled, it refused to open. The air in the room thickened, and the symbols on the walls seemed to shift, twisting and pulsating as if they were alive. A soft scraping sound echoed through the room, and I felt it, something moving in the shadows behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I could feel its gaze, cold and malevolent. The thing from the basement had found me. I yanked at the door again, harder this time, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I could hear the girl's voice behind me, soft and sing-song, like a child reciting a nursery rhyme. "It wants you to stay, to play." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I was trapped, just like the others. I could see it so clearly now, the students, the teachers, everyone who had disappeared over the years. They hadn't left. They had been taken. swallowed by whatever this thing was. And now it was my turn. The scraping grew louder, closer, and I could feel its presence looming behind me, the air thick with the stench of decay. My muscles screamed with tension as I threw my weight against the door, the wood creaking under the strain. It wouldn't give. It was as if the building itself was holding me here, determined to keep me inside. Asterisk, you need to leave now, asterisk. The voice didn't come from the girl. This one was deeper, more urgent, and it was coming from behind the door. For a split second, hope flared in my chest. Someone was out there, someone trying to help me. I slammed my hand against the door, pounding on it with everything I had. Please. Let me out. I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. There was no response. Only the oppressive silence and the faint, sinister hum of the symbols on the walls. I was running out of time. Whatever was behind me, it was closing in. Then, with a violent crack, the door flew open, and I stumbled forward, falling into the narrow hallway. My knees hit the floor hard, pain shooting up my legs, but I didn't care. I was out. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting long shadows, but I wasn't in the clear yet. I scrambled to my feet, slamming the door shut behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. The door rattled in its frame, but it stayed closed. For now. I took a moment to catch my breath, leaning against the wall, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The hallway was eerily silent, but I could still feel it, the darkness, the thing that had been chasing me. It was still here, somewhere, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. The girl's voice echoed in my head, her twisted smile burned into my mind. It wants you. The words gnawed at me, filling me with a sense of dread that clung to my bones. I had to find a way out of this place. Now. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The building seemed to shift around me, the hallways twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. Doors that should have led outside opened into more rooms, more dead ends. It was like the school itself was alive, twisting reality to trap me inside. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the main entrance, the double doors I'd seen when I first entered the building. The chain still hung across the handles, rusted and heavy, but the padlock was gone. I didn't have time to question it. I grabbed the chains, ripping them away and flinging the doors open. Cold night air hit me like a wall, and I stumbled outside, gasping for breath. I was free. But the relief was short-lived. As I stepped onto the cracked concrete steps, I saw it, standing at the edge of the school grounds, just beyond the broken fence. The figure in the janitor's uniform. It was watching me, its form hazy and indistinct, like a mirage. The same way it had looked in the hallway. But now I could see its face, or rather, the lack of one. The figure's face was a blank slate, smooth and featureless, except for a wide, jagged smile carved into the flesh. The same smile the girl had worn. My stomach twisted in horror as it raised one hand and pointed directly at me. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling the air around me. You can't leave. My legs felt like lead as I backed away, my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure took a step forward, slow and deliberate, its smile widening as it drew closer. I wasn't free. I would never be free. Suddenly, the ground beneath me began to tremble, a deep rumbling sound rising from the earth. I stumbled, looking down in horror as the pavement cracked and split open. From the jagged fissures, black tendrils of smoke began to rise, swirling up around me, wrapping themselves around my legs, pulling me down. No! I screamed, clawing at the ground, trying to pull myself free, but it was too late. The tendrils tightened their grip, dragging me down into the earth, the cold seeping into my bones. The figure in the janitor's uniform stood over me, its smile never faltering. And then, as the darkness swallowed me whole, I heard it, the last whisper, the one that echoed in my mind long after the world went black. You belong to it now. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the cracked windows of the school, the faded paint, and the playground beyond, frozen in time.